China, Russia, Japan, and the Ottoman Empire faced lots of challenges during the whole 19th century. Most of them were because of foreign influence, but there were still some caused by internal issues. Foreign pressure and invasions weakened these states and its power. The government of the states mentioned started off good. They experienced lack of order and ended up with corruption and bad leaders. The Ottoman Empire in decline. The nature of decline. The Ottoman Empire's military had been losing power. They lacked discipline in training and lacked in advancing their military technologies. The lack of power made the Ottoman Empire vulnerable to foreign attacks. This was a big reason they almost collapsed during this time because of invasions and territorial loss. They survived because of British intervention. The Ottoman exported mostly raw goods but not enough to cover the cost of European goods, which led to the slow decline in economic dependency and unpayable debts. This pushed the Ottoman to exempt Europeans from Ottoman law, which worsened their position, and merchants used this to avoid taxes. Reform and reorganization. The encroachment of European powers led to Ahmed II to change the economy and military, but faced friction from the Ottoman military. By the end of Muhammad's regime, the Ottoman Empire was more powerful and much more manageable despite its smaller size. Separatist groups started showing up at the beginning of the Tanzimat era. These groups attacked traditional Ottoman law and made it easier for Europeans to lift the capitulations could be lifted. Traditional Muslims did not like the Tanzimat changes for the fact that it promoted religious equality. A group called the Young Ottomans wanted a constitution like the Britons. The Young Turk era. In 1876, a group of radicalists put Abdul Hamid II as Sultan and influenced him to sign a constitution that limited his power and established a representative government. But within a year, he voided it and started exiling and executing liberals. This created lots of liberal opposition, and they soon began forming their own groups. The most active of the opposed organizations were the Young Turks. They wanted universal suffrage and equality for all, while trying to maintain Turkish leadership within the Ottoman Empire. The Russian Empire under pressure. Military defeat and social reform. The Russian forces were powerful but no match for the industrial power of the European forces as shown in the Crimean War. The Tatar economy would not support their ambitions. All these defeats inspired a reorganization program of the Russian social order. The crucial part of the social reform was the emancipation of the serfs in 1861, with the Tatars saying it's better to free them from above than to let them liberate themselves from the bottom. Attempts at political reform were unsuccessful and led to autocrats retaining power. Legal reforms were more successful with the judicial system adopting trial by juries and led to the emergence of attorneys and other legal experts, which helped judicial corruption decline. Revolution. During the last of the 3 decades of the 19th century, protests and revolutionary activities had sharp an increase. At the center of the protests was a class of intellectuals known as intellectual. Activists tried to get peasants to join them but didn't understand their motivation. However, the police did understand what the activists were doing and arrested or executed them. Separatist groups tried to gain influence through schools in non-Russian speaking territories, but the government forced them to speak Russian. In 1876, a recently formed LA and Freedom Party began promoting the assassination of government officials, and a separate faction called the People's Will successfully assassinated Alexander II in 1881 and caused Nicholas II to take the throne. Repression and revolution continued. In January 1905, a group of protesters marched to Tarsa's palace to protest, but Tarsa was not there and the troops fired upon the protesters. This day became Bloody Sunday, and this day 130 people were killed and caused more public outrage and further unhappiness.
The Chinese Empire under siege. The Chinese Empire and the Qing dynasty experienced even more difficulties than did the Ottoman and Russian empires during the 19th century. European powers inflicted military defeats on Qing forces and compelled China's leaders to accept a series of humiliating treaties. The provisions of these treaties undermined Chinese sovereignty. China's ruling elites developed reform programs to maintain social order, strengthen the state, and preserve the Qing dynasty. The reforms had limited effect, however, and by the early 20th century, China was in a seriously weakened condition. The Opium War and the unequal treaties. Seeking increased profits in the late 18th centuries, officials of the British East Indian Company grew opium in India and traded it for silver in China. By the late 1830s, however, government officials had become aware that China had a trade problem and a drug problem as well. Commissioner Lin acted quickly, confiscating and destroying some 20,000 chests of opium, starting the Opium War. The British won this war quickly by attacking the Grand Canal, causing the Chinese to sue for peace. The unequal treaties which the British forced upon the Chinese guided Chinese relations with other countries, legalized opium trade, and gave the British power over China's economy. The Taiping Rebellion. After 1850, rebellions erupted throughout China. The Nine Rebellion, the Muslim Rebellion, the Tungan Rebellion, and the most dangerous of all was the Taiping Rebellion, which raged throughout most of China. Hong Zhuan provided both inspiration and leadership for the Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Reform Program contained many radical features such as abolition of private property, the creation of commonwealth, public education, and the simplification of writing. In 1853, Hong took Nanjing and made it their capital, Taiping Kingdom. By 1864, Hong Zhuan committed suicide. Nanjing fell shortly after, and the rebellion was over. Reform frustrated. Contending with aggressive foreign powers and rebellion, Qing rulers recognized that changes were necessary for the empire to survive. Most imaginative of these reforms was a self-strengthening movement, which flourished especially in the 1860s and 1970s. In any case, the self-strengthening movement did not introduce enough industry to bring real military and economic strength to China. It also did not prevent continuing foreign intrusions into Chinese affairs. These setbacks sparked the ambitions of Hundred Days reforms of 1898. Through these reforms, government administration was revamped, the law code was changed, the military was reformed, and corruption was attacked. After this, Empress Xi, in opposition to the reforms, supported the Boxer Rebellion, which foreign powers called for her retirement. The Boxer Rebellion was an uprising against foreigners that occurred in China about in the 1900s, begun by peasants but eventually supported by the government. The transformation of Japan. A fleet of U.S. warships steamed into Tokyo Bay and demanded permission to establish trade and diplomatic relations with Japan. Heavily armed foreign powers forced the Tokugawa shogun and his government to sign unequal treaties like those given to the Qing dynasty. Opposition forces in Japan used the intrusions of foreigners as an excuse to overthrow the discredited shogun and Tokugawa Bakufu. After restoring their emperors to power in 1868, Japan's new rulers tried to transform Japanese society to be on equal footing with their foreign rivals. These changes, initiated during the Meiji period, turned Japan into a political and economic powerhouse of East Asia. As the price of rice and other commodities rose, the urban poor experienced destitution and hunger. Under these conditions, Japan experienced increasing peasant protests and rebellion during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The Tokugawa Bakufu responded with conservative reforms. Most of the reforms were ineffective and they provoked strong opposition that ultimately drove him from office. Another problem facing the Tokugawa was the insistence on the establishment of diplomatic and commercial relations by foreign lands. Tokugawa officials refused all of these requests and stuck to the policy of excluding all European and American visitors to Japan. In the later 1840s, the Bakufu began to make military preparations to resist potential attacks. The arrival of the U.S. The arrival of a U.S. Navy squadron in Tokyo Bay in 1853 abruptly changed the situation. The sudden intrusion of foreign powers predicated a domestic crisis in Japan and resulted in the collapse of the Tokugawa and the restoration of the imperial rule. After this, the boy Emperor Meiji took the reins of power. Meiji reforms. The Meiji Restoration turned authority to the Japanese emperor and brought an end to the series of military governments that had dominated Japan. The Meiji government looked to the industrial lands of Europe and the United States to obtain the knowledge and expertise to strengthen Japan and win revisions of the unequal treaties. The Meiji government sent many students and officials to study foreign constitutions. Most prominent of the Meiji-era travelers were Fukuzawa and Ito. Impressed by united Germany, Fukuzawa drew inspiration from their constitution while drafting a government document for Japan. The first goal of the Meiji leaders was to centralize political power that required destruction of the old social order. As a result, most daimyo found themselves effectively removed from power. Many samurai felt betrayed by these actions. Frustrated by these new circumstances, some samurai rose in rebellion, but the recently created national army crushed all opposition. The Meiji Rebellion, through multiple reforms, was able to institute universal education, built railroads, and established a strong military and navy. Overall, the Meiji leaders transformed Japan into a powerful industrial society, poised to play a major role in world affairs.
The Great War, the World and a People. Nationalist aspirations. The French Revolution and Napoleonic conquest spread the concept of nationalism through Europe, promoting the idea that people with similar ethnic origins, language, and political ideals should form their own sovereign states. Many early 19th century European powers opposed the idea of self-determination, denying national autonomy to groups such as Germans, Italians, and Belgians. Nationalistic movements led to the independence of Belgium from the Netherlands in 1830 and contributed to the unification of Italy in 1861 and Germany in 1871. Nationalistic movements led to the independence of Belgium from the Netherlands in 1830 and contributed to the unification of Italy in 1861 and Germany in 1871. Despite these changes, nationalism remained a complex issue in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, where nationalist aspirations of minority groups in the Ottoman, Habsburg, and Russian empires disrupted regional stability. Opposition to foreign rule fueled national identities and calls for self-determination, leading to the weakening of the Ottoman Empire's control over the Balkans after 1829. Nationalist revolts in the Balkans led to the independence of Greece, Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria, while Austria-Hungary faced movements from Slavic groups such as Poles, Czechs, and Serbs. Serbia aimed to unite with other Slavic people, which heightened tensions in the region. Russia supported pan-Slavism, seeking to unite Slavic people and promote secession from Austria-Hungary. This support, along with Germany's backing of Austria-Hungary, increased international tensions. The interactions and alliances driven by nationalism set the stage for international conflicts and wars in the 19th and 20th century. National rivalries. Aggression and nationalism led to economic and colonial conflicts across Europe. Great Britain and Germany competed intensely for foreign markets, which increased tensions. By the early 20th century, Germany's industrial growth posed a threat to British economic supremacy. The costly naval race between Germany and Britain further heightened tensions as both sought to dominate trade routes and maintain naval power. Britain countered Germany's naval expansion by building dreadnoughts, escalating the arms race. European powers aggressively expanded their colonies for economic gain, resulting in frequent conflicts in regions such as Siam and Morocco. Germany actively pursued colonial expansion to assert its place in the Sun. The rivalry between Germany, Britain, and France influenced international allies and set the stage for war. Between 1905 and 1914, a series of international crises and local wars, such as the French-German confrontation over Morocco and the Balkan Wars, increased regional tensions. Public demand for national superiority fueled the aggression nationalisms with mass media, contributing to the push for international prestige. This pressure put diplomats in a difficult position as they had to balance immediate gains with potential long-term consequences. Understandings and alliances. National rivalries and minority aspirations for self-determination led to the creation of complex alliance systems among European nations. Each country prioritized fulfilling treaty obligations as a means of self-preservation and mutual support during conflicts. These alliances set the stage for a potential chain reaction that could escalate a local dispute into a global conflict. The Triple Alliance, formed by Germany and Austria-Hungary and later joined by Italy, focused on mutual protection against Russia and preserving the political status quo. Tensions arose between Italy and Austria-Hungary due to their rivalry in the Balkans. The Triple Entente emerged from agreements between Britain and France and between Britain and Russia to resolve colonial disputes and curb Germany's influence. This cooperation led to a military pact among Britain, France, and Russia by 1914. Nations developed inflexible military plans and schedules for war. French strategy, known as Plan XVI or Plan 17, emphasized offensive attacks. Germany's Schlieffen-Plan aimed to quickly defeat France before turning to defeat against Russia. These rigid strategies made it difficult to maintain peace during international crises and contributed to the eventual outbreak of war. On 28 June 1914, Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, sparking the greatest war in human history up to that point. Princip was a member of the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist group seeking to unite all South Slavs into a greater Serbia. Austria connected the assassins to the Black Hand and held the Serbian government responsible. Austria issued the ultimatum to Serbia, which Serbia mostly accepted but rejected one demand regarding Austria's involvement in Serbian investigations. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on 28 July 1914. Diplomatic efforts quickly escalated into war due to complex mobilization plans and alliances. These events transformed a local conflict into a general European war. On 29 July, Russia mobilized its forces to defend Serbia and itself against Austria. This led to Germany issuing ultimatums to Russia and France, escalating the conflict. Germany declared war on Russia on the 1st of August and on France on the 3rd of August. Germany invaded Belgium on the 3rd of August, following the Schlieffen Plan, promoting Britain to declare war on Germany on the 4th of August. Mutual butchery. In August 1914, many soldiers expected a quick and heroic victory. Each side held strong patriotic beliefs, thinking that God supported them. The German advance towards Paris stopped at the Marne River, leading to a race to the sea and the onset of trench warfare. Trench warfare created a stalemate with little movement on the western and southern fronts. Trenches extended from the English Channel to Switzerland, and barbed wire and machine guns made crossing no man's land lethal. Initially neutral, Italy joined the Allies in 1915 due to the Treaty of London, which promised them territories controlled by Austro-Hungary. New weapons, such as poisonous gas, tanks, and airplanes were introduced to break the stalemate. Mustard gas was particularly feared for its delayed and severe effects. The British first used tanks in late 1915, while airplanes were mostly used for reconnaissance. Civilians faced danger from warfare, including air raids and naval blockades. The German Zeppelin attack on Paris in 1914 marked the start of air warfare against civilians. The British naval blockade of Germany led to an estimated 500,000 German civilian deaths from starvation. Battles in Eastern Europe and the Balkans were more fluid than in the West. Combined German and Austrian forces overtook Serbia, Albania, and Romania. Failed Russian offensives contributed to unrest and revolution in Russia. Total War, the Home Front. Helmuth Karl von Moltke foresaw future wars as prolonged conflicts of attrition requiring the complete defeat of a nation's strength. The Great War involved entire societies, not just armies, with total victory being the only acceptable outcome due to the significant sacrifices. The war created both military and home fronts, leading nations to mobilize their economies and citizens. Governments overtook control of civilian production and labor, implementing wage and price controls and extending work hours. Conscription of men led to women stepping into the workforce, taking on roles in munitions, factories, and other industries. Women faced dangerous working conditions, such as TNT poisoning, which could cause yellow skin and orange hair. Upper-class women found the war experience empowering, while working-class women's lives were less impacted as they were already used to earning wage. Women's wartime contributions helped lead to extended voting rights in Britain, Germany, and Austria after the war. Governments limited civil liberties, censored negative news, and used propaganda to maintain national unity. Propaganda depicted the enemy as subhuman and engaged in atrocities, leading to skepticism and disbelief in future conflicts due to the spread of false stories. Conflict in East Asia and the Pacific. The Great War quickly expanded beyond Europe to become a global conflict. European powers involved their colonies, particularly in Africa, in the war effort. British and French forces recruited millions of African and Asian men to serve in their armies. British Dominion lands, such as Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Newfoundland, and South Africa also contributed troops. Japan, the United States, and the Ottoman Empire entered the war for reasons separate from the original European conflict. Japan joined the Allies in August 1914 after Germany rejected its demand regarding Jiaozhou, northeastern China. Japan took control of German-held territories in China and the Pacific. Between August and November 1914, Japan seized the German-held port of Qingdao in Shandong Province. Japan also took over German-held Pacific islands such as the Marshall Islands, Mariana Islands, Palau, and the Carolines. In January 1915, Japan presented China with the 21 demands. These demands included recognizing Japan's seizure of Shandong, granting Japanese industrial monopolies in central China, giving Japan control over Chinese police forces and arms purchases. China accepted most of the demands but rejected some, with British support helping to prevent total capitulation. These demands revealed Japan's ambition to dominate East Asia and establish a foundation for future Japanese pressure on China.
Battles in Africa and Southwest Asia. When the War of 1914 to 1918 erupted in Europe, all of sub-Saharan Africa consisted of European colonies. The Germans controlled 4 of these colonies: Togoland, the Cameroons, German Southwest Africa, and German Southeast Africa. The African German colonies were much more difficult to capture than the Pacific ones. Germs were much more deadly than the Germans. Tens of thousands of Allied forces succumbed to disease. Winston Churchill suggested that an Allied attack against the Ottomans would hurt the Germans. After successfully fending off Allied forces on the beaches of Gallipoli in 1915 and Mesopotamia, Ottoman armies retreated slowly on all fronts. In 1919, the victorious Allies gathered in Paris to hammer out revolution in Russia. In the spring of 1917, disintegrating armies, mutinies, and food shortages provoked a series of street demonstrations and strikes in Petrograd. After its success in Petrograd, the revolution spread throughout the country, and political powers in Russia shifted to 2 new agencies: the Provisional Government and the Petrograd Soviet of Workers. The period between March and November witnessed a political struggle between the Provisional Government and the Petrograd Soviet. Into this tense political situation stepped Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. In a moment of high drama, the German High Command hoped to stir up trouble with Russia by transporting Lenin. In September, Lenin persuaded the Central Committee to organize an armed insurrection. The Bolshevik rulers ended Russia's involvement in the Great War, U.S. intervention, and collapse of the Central Powers. In 1914, the American public firmly opposed intervention in a European war. After the outbreak of the war, the United States pursued a neutrality that favored the Allies. During the first 2 years of the war, the U.S. economy coped with a severe business recession that saw thousands of businesses fail. With the war grinding on, the Allies took out large loans with American banks, which persuaded some Americans that an Allied victory was good economically. The official factor in the United States' decision to enter the war was Germany's resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. In April 1916, Irish nationalists mounted the Great Easter Rebellion, which attempted to overthrow British rule in Ireland. The Central Powers suffered from food shortages due to the British blockade. Finally, the Germans signed an armistice which took effect on the 11th of November 1918. The Paris Peace Conference. Conservative estimates suggest that the war killed 15 million people and wounded 20 million others. 1 year prior to the opening of the Paris Peace Conference, Woodrow Wilson forwarded a proposal for a just post-war peace settlement. The final form of the treaties represented a series of compromises among the victors. In addition, the Allies prohibited Germany and Austria from entering any sort of political union. Arrangements between the defeated Ottoman Empire and the Allies proved to be a more complicated affair. Turkey's post-war transformation and its success in refashioning the terms of peace proved to be something of an exception. In an effort to avoid future destructive conflict, the US never joined because the Senate rejected the idea. The Soviet challenges to European preeminence. The Great War changed Europe forever, but to